Antonio Guterres, welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What's your greatest area of concern at the moment?
Well, indeed, the fact that we are witnessing a multiplication of new crises. Last year it was Côte d'Ivoire, it was Libya, Syria, Yemen, the Horn of Africa. Since the beginning of the year, Sudan and South Sudan, now the Tuaregs in Mali. And at the same time, old crises seem never to die. Afghanistan is still there with enormous problems.
How much of what you see is driven by corruption, war, bad politics or bad foreign policy?
I think it's essentially a problem of conflict and the inability of the international community to organize things in order to prevent conflict and to solve conflict. I've lived in the bipolar world. When I was in office in my country, it was the unipolar world. We are no longer in a bipolar or unipolar world, but we are not yet in a multipolar world. So to a certain extent, we sometimes feel that nobody is in charge. It's a kind of a free-for-all situation in which the behavior of international actors is unpredictable. And as I said, conflicts tend to become eternal, not to be solved. And this has a dramatic impact on the suffering of people and on the displacement of people. More and more refugees and more people internally displaced, trapped within the borders of their own countries in conflict.
Will scarce food and resources make the world an even more dangerous place?
I have no doubt that's what is happening today. If you look at the Somali crisis has a clear political dimension, but that political dimension was enormously enhanced by the fact that food insecurity generated famine in large parts of the country.
It's the Australian government's stated policy to engage Malaysia in taking some of the people that are seeking asylum here. What's your view on that?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that Australia has always been a very important pillar of the international asylum system. Australia has received 750,000 refugees until now. Australia is one of the most successful, if not the most successful, resettlement program in the world, with large number of people being successfully integrated in the Australian society. Now, it's also true that if one looks at the number of boat people that comes into Australia, it's a relatively small number compared with other regions of the world. And so, to a certain extent, we always find this debate a little bit inflated in Australia. And we would prefer, to be honest, that these cases could be resettled, could be processed in the country itself. Having said so, we will always be considering whatever proposal the Australian government makes of cooperation with other countries in the region, having always one essential concern, that all protection problems of the people are adequately met. And it was based on that we have issued our own opinions when consulted about that agreement with Malaysia.
Isn't it the view of the UNHCR that if the Australian government is to send asylum seekers to another country, that country should be a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention?
I think that, as I said, our preference is always that these situations are solved in Australia itself. In mechanisms of international cooperation, what is important is to guarantee that effective protection is granted, that people will not be refooled, that people can have humane reception conditions, they will not have arbitrary detention, that they have access to education, health systems and employment. And so it's not only a question of knowing whether a country is or not signatory to the convention, is a question of knowing whether a country is able to fully respect these protection concerns.
And is Malaysia such a country?
Well, as I said, we gave our opinion about the conditions that should be met. The agreement did not move forward. If any agreement of this nature will in the future be considered, we will be issuing again our opinions. But I repeat, we consider that the preferred solution is always for countries to process the asylum requests of those that reach their territory.
What about the policy of mandatory detention? There are now more than 1,000 people who have been in detention for more than a year. 750 have spent more than 548 days in detention, and 173 have been in detention for more than 2 years. Is that acceptable?
Well, that was in the very center of the very open and constructive discussions I had today, both with the Prime Minister, the members of the government and the opposition. Detention is the area in which we would like improvements to be made, in the sense that detention should be more an exception and less a rule, and that, of course, detention conditions should be improved. I saw a commitment of the government to look seriously into that. Another issue that was discussed has to do with the security assessments, and in order to make the process to be quicker and to introduce some checks and balances into it. So there are aspects of progress to be made, and as I said, they were in the very center of the discussions I had today with the Australian authorities, and very encouraged by the openness in those discussions.
And did you also discuss the 506 children who are in alternative places of detention on Christmas Island and the mainland?
Yes, we discussed all aspects related to, as I said, detention and security assessments. And this is the area where, as I said, we hope that we will be able to witness some progress has already happened, but there is still a long way to go. And I hope that there will be an important movement forward in the near future.
The opposition says that if it comes to power, it will tow boats back to Indonesia. Is that viable or even safe?
We have been very clearly saying that we are ready to discuss with any government any policy of international cooperation in this area. But we don't think that pushbacks are a solution. We have clearly opposed pushbacks in the Italian case in the Mediterranean in the recent past, before the Libyan crisis. And we think that that is clearly a violation in relation to the 51 Convention. As I said, we would prefer situations like these to be processed in the country. We are ready to consider international mechanisms that meet protection requirements. And we also are concerned with the fact that smugglers and traffickers are very active in the world, and with dramatic violation of human rights of the people that suffer their action. So we are ready to also cooperate with states in order to make sure that mechanisms are created to crack down on smugglers and traffickers, and at the same time to protect people and to grant people access to places where they can be protected without having to suffer the very negative impact of, as I said, the violations of human rights they suffer in the hands of smugglers and traffickers in today's world. Not only in Australia. If you look at numbers, about 6,000 people came to Australia last year, but to Italy and Malta, 58,000. To Yemen, 100,000. So this is a global problem in which the numbers in Australia are still relatively small, and that is why we believe that this debate has sometimes been inflated out of proportion with the reality of the problem in itself, and that there should be a scope for a calm and rational approach to these questions in a way that could meet the protection requirements of people.
If I could just ask you a final question as the former Prime Minister of Portugal, how concerned are you that Greece will buckle under this harsh austerity drive?
Well, I mean, obviously as a Portuguese, as an European, I'm very worried with the present situation in Europe, and especially in the southern part of Europe. Levels of unemployment have grown enormously. People are suffering, and this is a very challenging situation. And I hope that Europe will be able to put together mechanisms of solidarity and support that will help these countries cope with the huge challenges they are facing and reduce the very negative impact, especially on vulnerable people.
Antonio Guterres, thank you.
Thank you very much.